In these times of uncertainty, it's all the more important that we keep collaborating, informing, and inspiring each other, so that we can be smarter and better tomorrow. Welcome to the Pakhuis de Zwijger livecast.
Hi, welcome at Pakhuis de Zwijger at Tech for Society. My name is Puk van Dijk. I'm your moderator this evening. And this is already the last of a series of 3 livecasts around digital ledger and design and blockchain technologies. In the first episode, so this was 2 weeks ago, we talked about the human in the machine. The program was called The Uses of Disorder in the Blockchain City. Last week, the program was called Values in the Blockchain City, and we talked about if blockchain systems can be designed to support alternative economies and solidarity. And tonight, the program is called Urban Commons in the Blockchain City. We will talk about and look at real-world examples of blockchain projects, focusing on sustainable development and the commons. The series is organized by the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences lectorates, Play and Civic Media, and Institute of Network Cultures, together with Het Nieuwe Instituut and Pakhuis de Zwijger. At home, you can watch, of course, this program via the livecast button on the website of Pakhuis de Zwijger, but you can also actually join us by clicking on the yellow Zoom button and then join the conversation by asking your question in the Q&A of Zoom. So you're more than welcome to join us and ask questions, and I'll try to look at them once in a while. Let's get going. Let's get started. I'm not alone here. I am joined by my, my sidekick, who is called Klaas Kuitenbrouwer. Klaas, welcome. You are a researcher digital culture at Het Nieuwe Instituut, and you're also one of the organizers of this series.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit more of an introduction on yourself and also within the context of this program?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yes, I'm a researcher at Het Nieuwe Instituut in Rotterdam. Kind of worked from the angle of digital culture, but mostly focused on the intersections of technology, culture, and ecology. And my relation to the Circular project is, we were one of the partners developing the, originally having a role in the dissemination. So that's also why I got involved in organizing this series of programs. But also through the Circular project, I got into researching whether a blockchain would be useful in a particular project that I was working on, called the Zoop project, which was about, and the blockchain had potentially a role in assessing or kind of documenting ecological value of a site. But the research for me concluded that no, we can't use the blockchain, and in a way that's also my relation to tonight. What I hope to get out is to find out what are the exact use cases, in what situations do blockchains actually work? Because when we got all of us got excited about blockchains, it seemed to be this general purpose technology. It turns out it's actually not that general purpose. It's quite specific. They're very specific situations in which it may function, and then there's a lot of extra baggage that comes in with when you use a blockchain that is not always useful. So I hope to get out tonight more insight in when does it actually work. And the speakers and the projects to be discussed looked extremely exciting and on point to discuss this issue. So I'm really looking forward.
Yeah, let's start with our first guest. He's joining us via Zoom. He is a professor at the Department of Computer Science at the University of Torino in Italy. Guido Boella, welcome. Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi, glad to have you here. You're talking today about something called commons hood, and I was going to ask Guido if you can just take 1 minute to explain to us what commons hood actually is.
Thanks for the invitation, first of all. CommonsHood is a blockchain-based application, which is in the hand of the user an app, a wallet app, where, differently from many wallet apps, you can create your own kind of tokens. That's why we call it Internet of Values 2.0 approach, even if there is still not yet probably an Internet of Values 1.0. The analogy is with the Web 2.0, where since 2000, everyone without technical knowledge could create content, multimedia content on the web. With CommonsHood, we want to make something similar, allowing everyone without specific knowledge to create their own type of tokens, obviously instantiating some kinds of specific templates that we make available to everyone. The idea is to allow people, in particular Commons, because the project comes from 2 European projects on Commons, CoCity and CO3, aiming at creating, let's say, such local financial instruments to increase the sustainability of Commons. So one can create a range of instruments, ranging from simpler things like discount coupons, other kind of customer fidelization instruments, crowd sales, digital certificates, digital collectibles, but even simple forms of local currencies.
Yeah. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what you said earlier, that this kind of blockchain wallet app called CommonsHood, it was developed with the aim to support financial inclusion and sustainability, right?
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
So can you tell us a little bit more on how the CommonsHood application contributes to achieving that goal?
Mm-hmm. Blockchain has been proposed for several applications in financial inclusion, for people underbanked or totally unbanked, with proposal going from peer-to-peer lending, microcredits, airdropping of currencies, universal basic incomes. In our case, the ambition is to give to commons, to retailers, to citizens, to associations, an instrument to make to exploit some positive externalities in the local economy environment. So, for example, one can think of a retailer creating discount coupons, giving them to, for example, the commons, managing some self-help structure, and so on. You can imagine an association using some form of a crowd sale offered by the app, that is a sort of crowdfunding, accepting as input some token and giving as output other kinds of tokens representing, for example, right of use of some structure or some facility created or managed by the association. Lowering, the idea is to get the main point of blockchain, that is disintermediation and reduction of costs. Because everyone can directly use this kind of instrument. Take the simple example of discount coupon. You don't need to print anything. You don't need to make an agreement with whatever provider of advertisement of such kind of services. You have a tool like it was the web when it became available to everyone.
Yeah, but so what I'm curious about is, you've been talking about a very local approach, whilst blockchain, at least now, is used very globally, right? So it's to connect peers from around the world. So why is the blockchain useful for these kind of small-scale application in the community?
Okay, yeah. This is a general methodology that we are applying in our research group. For example, we have another connected tool, which is called FirstLife, which is a georeferenced local network. And there the idea is to scale from the global level to the local level, again, the possibilities offered by social networks. But scaled at the local level for the local benefit. And here we do the same. Instead of having a global, maybe speculative currency, we want to give tools at the local level. Obviously, is a challenge.
Why?
But because usually with the social networks or blockchains, the global scale helps in the success of the approach. But since we are a university and we can afford to test new ways, since we don't have to make a profit, we are trying to bring these benefits of this intermediation, in particular at the local level, at the level of the community, where you have anyway thousands of retailers, associations, tens of hundreds of thousands of citizens. So maybe you can reach a critical mass.
Klaas has a question for you, Guido.
So, if I understand correctly, the university kind of carries that external cost, let's say the overhead costs of running this, and the benefits go to the local community, right?
Yes, that's the general approach, and also take the risks, because maybe an enterprise would not have afford in its business plan to make that choice. So
you become a kind of a steward of a series of local value networks. The university is a steward of a series of local value networks,
Yes, exactly.
So does that mean that could those value networks kind of, because the dream of the blockchain is this autonomy, this is also what you say, basically local networks can decide on their own value exchange systems. But this involves the university. So let's say, there is a kind of autonomy at play, but there's also a dependency on a large institution to actually run the backbone.
Yes, but since we don't use a permissionless approach, we also reduce the costs of running the blockchain. So it runs on a handful of quite simple nodes based on standard technology like Ethereum. And it is an approach that we are scaling also to other initiatives. For example, we have a related project on agri-food traceability with blockchain, where we want to create at the regional level an open blockchain for all kinds of agri-food actors to use freely the blockchain. Again, permissioned, limited, but simpler and less costly.
And so does this also answer, because Klaas and I have been talking about this a bit on beforehand, does this also answer the question to you, Klaas, why necessarily the blockchain? Well,
there's a lot, of course, too many questions to be covered in such a short period, but I can see why blockchain would be useful. But let's say the encryption, the permissionless, the encryption side, the anonymity is not a part of it. So, but that's covered by this permissionless system. So it's actually there's certain aspects of a blockchain which work here, namely the guarantee of value, the kind of the stable unit, the stable calculation of value that allows people to work on their own value systems. So that seems to be a good, so it's kind of, it's not a full blockchain, let's say, as we know it from Bitcoin, but it's certain aspects of it which with a very targeted application, if I understand it correctly.
I agree, and I would add also not relying on a single third party for everything.
Exactly.
Creating a more open system.
Thank you so much, Guido, for this. We will see you back in the end discussion later on. We're going to go to our next guest now, who's also joining on Zoom, Sarah Friend. She's here on behalf of Circles. I think you're in Berlin right now. Is it not, Sarah?
Yes, in Berlin.
Yeah, hi.
Nice to be here.
Hi there.
Virtually.
So Sarah, you're here to talk about Circles, which is a basic income system using blockchain technology. In 1 minute, can you explain to us what Circles is?
I can try. So Circles, as you can see in the name, sometimes describes itself as a basic income on the blockchain, and sometimes we give the name as Circles UBI, so Circles Universal Basic Income. And I think it's debated internally in our team whether that naming or reference helps us more than it hurts us, because Circles isn't quite a universal basic income in the way people normally think of it. Normally, when that term comes to mind, people think the state is collecting wealth and redistributing it. So Circles is more, it's maybe more accurately described as an alternative currency that has the property of leading to more equal amounts of wealth over time. So as people stay in the system, currency is minted to them in a way that makes the differences between the amount of money they have become relatively smaller. Which is a fairly technical point, but that is how Circles works. Yeah. And if that technical part was scary, it's also very, very simple. It's just an app that you use in the browser. The URL is circles.garden.
Great, thanks. So why a UBI, a universal basic income on the blockchain? I mean, what are your motivations to use this kind of system?
Yeah, I want to apologize for my dog who was chewing his bone during the last answer. I took it away from him. But yeah, why blockchain? This is a great question, and I'm happy that you're asking it. I think, like many new technologies, blockchain has had this moment of everything looks like a nail to be hit with the blockchain hammer. Personally, I suppose I feel like there are still use cases, and one of them is the one it was invented for, money. So Circles is actually a currency. So some of the guarantees that blockchains were designed for, like Bitcoin, really apply to us. And I think if I were to put more simply what those guarantees are is, has a possible adversary. Why might someone want to attack the integrity of your ledger? Well, if it's storing money, they have a good reason. And I think also in the UBI context, there's been a long and rich history of UBI experiments done in many countries. And a lot of them, most of them, get shut down at some point. In the more normal case, a planned shutdown, but also sometimes in the case of political whim or electoral change leading to these programs being canceled. And that actually happened where I'm from. So I'm from Canada, I'm from Ontario, and we had a big universal basic income pilot rolling out within the last couple of years in a city called Hamilton. And that program was really exciting, but it was shut down really short into its runtime because the government of that region changed. And it was really sad, almost heartbreaking even, to read the comments of people who had been part of it. Talking about how, I'd only received this income for a couple months and I had just started to, make changes in my life as a result, but now it's gone. It takes duration for a system like this to actually show whether it will have a beneficial effect. So I guess the hope of launching Circles on a blockchain is that if this is of benefit to some community, no one can take it away from them.
And so the community is global. Anyone can join, or for who is this?
Yeah, Circles has a really interesting tension between global and local going on, I think. And if one of your planned questions is about trust, maybe we should take this one first because it's a really key part of how Circles works. Sure. Yeah.
Please.
Okay. Yeah.
Klaas?
Yeah. So what about trust?
Well, I'm so glad you asked.
You're welcome.
And now might be a good part for the slides to go to the how it works section. The first slide in there.
And yeah, also to give a bit of an introduction, I guess that blockchain projects are, you know, often framed as being trustless in a way, but I guess you have a different view on this, and you're about to tell us what that view is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
In Circles, you can imagine, you know, if you're gonna give a universal basic income or give away money in a permissionless peer-to-peer system, you need a concept of identity. Otherwise, you are possibly giving away 10 times as much money to one actual human as you want to. So in Circles, the way that works is when you sign up for Circles, you actually get your own token, which is attached to your pseudonymous blockchain identity. And then your token makes trust connections to other people's tokens in the Circle system. So you get this kind of structure that we call a web of trust, but also sometimes described as a monetary fabric of all these individual coins weaving together to form one system. And so these trust connections mitigate the risk because we only pass circles along them. So, you know, say I trust Guido. Guido can now send me his circles. And of course, you might be wondering, you know, that's not a lot of fungibility. That might make my circles hard to spend. But we also do those trust transactions transitively. So say I trust Guido and Guido trusts Glaus. And Glaus wants to pay me. Glaus can send some of his tokens to Guido, and then Guido will send the same amount of his tokens to me, and we sort of passed the money through the network. So Circles, anyone can sign up globally, but also transactions really only work amongst communities of people who know each other, and the money flows through primarily real life or real social networks. Right. Not real life. We can know people online.
Klaas has a burning question on this.
Well, it's what you addressed already, but one of the key, let's say, characteristics of the original blockchain design was trustlessness. The point of doing a blockchain was you didn't need to trust the people because you could trust the algorithm, but you seem to kind of circumvent that aspect. So that kind of begs the question then, why do we need, if we actually trust the people involved, why do we actually need a blockchain?
Well, I mean, we have sort of these I guess there's two types of trust. There's like a person-to-person trust, and then there's a system-level trust. So the system-level trust is being enforced by the blockchain. So I trust these contracts to execute. I trust it to treat the transactions sent by everybody in the network equally. And I trust it to follow my personal rules for this sort of human-to-human level trust that I've sent to it. So there really are, so you're right, there are these two competing versions, but they're kind of hitting different levels of the network, if that makes sense. One is really infrastructural, and one is person-to-person.
Yeah,
because then the question is like, so then it's an alternative infrastructure for value exchange, right next to, let's say, banking apps or other apps.
Yeah, I would say that's accurate.
Okay. We have some more questions, but we'll save them for the end discussion with you, Sarah, as well. So thank you very much for this. And we are going to our next guest, who is actually here in the studio. Her name is Tara Karpinski. Hi. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome here at the table. You're a designer and co-founder of Pink Pony Express, which is a designer collective.
Yes.
And basically what I understood is you're focused on researching and mostly visualizing social networks.
For the Circular project, one of my assignments was to investigate ways to actually visualize the blockchain.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
transactions on the blockchain.
Exactly. And as you said already, you are one of the researchers that worked on the Circulate project. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, that's okay, because we discussed that in the first episode of this series. And Klaas is here also to give us a little bit of a look back at what is the Circulate project.
It's a research project run by the HVA, the Amsterdam School of Applied Sciences, together with a lot of partners, and it researches the application of blockchain technologies for urban commons. And their main result is actually a series of considerations. So when you want to apply, there's 7 or 6 different kind of dimensions or aspects of your design that have like two kind of poles that you have to take into consideration. Do you want it to be anonymous? Do you want it to be personal? Do you want it to be quantified, or do you want it to regulate? Do you want to leave it open? All kinds of things that you have to know about how to position your application.
Yeah, and you are also you are still part of this Circulate project.
Yeah.
You were most closely involved with various communities in this research. I'm very curious on how did you approach these communities as a researcher? So what was your way of working?
Yeah, so my role in this project and the way that I normally work in other projects as well is to embed myself within the context that I'm actually working on. Mm-hmm. We researched a few different communities during the Circulate project, and I would say the one that in the end I found the most intriguing was Schoon Schip, which is a new sustainable floating neighborhood in Amsterdam-Noord. And I kind of tasked myself with trying as closely as possible to look from the perspective of the community. What are their issues? What are their questions? And maybe even some of their struggles, as opposed to, or let's say, parallel with our concerns or interests as researchers, because sometimes those things are not directly in line with one another. So I feel like it was also really important actually to take the perspective of the community in developing a design that would be helpful for them and not necessarily just helpful for us.
Right, right. So as you were saying, Schoon Schip is one of the examples of the community that you did your research on. Can you tell us a little bit more about, because they were thinking about implementing a blockchain system, right?
Yeah, I actually came in after the implementation of the blockchain system. That was sort of just getting up and running as I entered the project, but the community had been working longer together with the architects, Space and Matter, who are one of the consortium partners in the research, and also a technology corporation called Spectral, to basically write an algorithm that would program trading along the smart grid, which is a collective system of batteries that distributes locally produced energy.
Right, yeah. Right. Okay, so what were their motivations to, because I know you've been part of the project later on, but they had probably some motivations on working with the blockchain and also maybe some concerns?
Well, I don't know if their motivations were necessarily blockchain specific, but I think their general motivation throughout the realization of the project was sustainability. And in terms of how they were producing and trading energy, I learned through my research that there were actually some agreements set up along the way about how to behave in a more sustainable way. And in order to encourage some of those behaviors, it's then important to provide insight into how those behaviors are triggered and archived, which is what they were using the blockchain system for.
Right, right. Okay, and did they have any concerns about using that?
I think maybe there were a few concerns from specific residents, but to be honest, when I came into the project, the real big concern was just getting the neighborhood up and running. So the technological aspects of how the batteries worked and archiving of information was sort of like, I would say at that point, less of a priority than just making sure like your house was warm. So
right.
I think now that things have calmed down a little bit, some of these questions are coming more to the forefront and also partially triggered by the research and making these considerations visual, there's discussions popping up about how to, let's say, adjust the algorithm in the future or make it work more for the community in the way that they want it to.
Yeah. So can you dive a little bit deeper in making this kind of abstract idea more visual? And specifically this Energizer project you have been working on?
I can.
There
I don't
you
know.
go.
Yeah, this is the introduction slide. So one of the most important insights when I started working on location was that Spectral, the technology company, had developed a dashboard on the back end that was visualizing a lot of the data regarding energy transactions. But most of the community was not looking at this dashboard. The information was also displayed on the batteries, but you don't go down to your basement and like check in with your battery. So what was actually really valuable information, which would encourage, for instance, like energy saving behaviors, was largely invisible. So I was really interested in this idea of how can we use public space, or in this case, semi-public space, to visualize and trigger and make these discussions public to basically allow the residents to achieve these sustainability goals that they had set up beforehand. And maybe I can explain a little bit how this works. So here you see a screenshot of the dashboard. I'm not sure what the next slide is. Can we skip? Oh, yeah. So with Spectral, who is also one of the partners, we really zoomed in on this data. And you can see the data is aggregated to portray individual households and also on a community level. And quite big changes can occur on the grid in a way that is different to the normal power grid. Because if you think about a community like Schoonschip, a lot of people, like all of us now, are freelancers working at home, have a different rhythm. So their peak times were not what we would expect. This is what we saw back in the data. And what we chose to do was to reflect this basically in the form of a geyser, which we called the Energizer. And the geyser is programmed using the data from the smart grid to spout at different heights. Right? So basically, if I want to, yeah, this is an inspiration image.
That's not the actual geyser.
So you can see from 5 meters to 0 meters is the range that we're working on. And 5 meters means an abundance of energy. So the idea is like, I look out my window, I see the geysers at 5 meters, and I feel really good about turning on my dishwasher, right? In another scenario, if it's at 3.5 meters, that's a situation where you're a little bit like, maybe it's better if I don't do it now.
Right.
So you're encouraging these energy-saving behaviors by visualizing the data in a completely different way than we're used to looking at.
In a very intuitive way as well.
I hope so. Yeah, that was definitely one of the goals.
Yeah. And so you were also working on what you call design probes, I guess. And in this case, in this particular case, interventions that allow discussion, right? Kind of to shape this abstract consequences of the blockchain system. So how do you do that? And also, why is this approach so important?
Well, I think a couple of interesting things happen when you approach a project in this way. Because the geyser was developed in conversation with the neighborhood, you already start discussions about things like value transparency or how technology is implemented on a community level before the project was being realized. Within the Circulate project, we had a lot of discussions like, did the research phase actually happen before we launched the geyser? And now that we're actually going to launch it, I really wonder what will come afterwards because we learned so much before. And I think the second thing which you refer to, which is really important, is investigating ways to make really abstract technology or issues more tangible for communities that would like to implement it. Yep. Because I think we can't expect somebody who would join a sustainable community to necessarily have an intimate knowledge of a blockchain system. Yeah. So that was the second
So also
aim.
to kind of democratize the whole process.
In a way,
yeah. Klaas, do you have any questions?
Yeah, well, I'm actually, because it seems to be, so it's a calculation, it's a smart grid system that is, the community, let's say, aggregate is visualized to the geyser. The smart grid runs on a fairly local, fairly kind of all within lines of sight community. So again, I have the question, why use a blockchain? Why not just any kind of automation?
Yeah, I think there are two reasons for that. It's not a closed energy system, so there are also transactions being made to one external port, so they do have the ability to buy in and out. So it's important in terms of the buy-in, for instance, to see exactly which households are buying in so that they can be charged individually for their transactions. So not all the energy is circulating on a communal level. And the second reason, and that to me is really interesting, is because of changes in the energy laws in 2021, these kind of small-scale cooperative communities can actually trade on the actual energy market independently. So then these blockchain technologies become really important tools in order to solidify that cooperative effort.
Again, I would say, a solid use case. No, I'm losing my skepticism a little bit.
Well, hopefully also with our last guest, Tara, thank you.
I have a lot of reserve, though.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to our last guest of this evening, Joost Beunerman, who is the director of Dark Matter Labs in London. Joost, are you there, joining us from London?
I am.
Hi.
And I have to say, I'm just a director of
you're
Dark Matter
a
Labs.
director. There you go.
We are several, and there's a massive team that it's really all about, not about me.
Right. One of the directors of Dark Matter Labs. There you go. And at Dark Matter Labs, you design institutional infrastructure for a distributed and collaborative future. In 1 minute, if you can elaborate a little bit more, what is the main goal of Dark Matter Labs?
Well, we see that the world is very obviously at a point of massive crisis, and that our institutional infrastructures are fundamentally, by and large, 20th century institutional infrastructures that are not fit for the scale and the complexity and the entanglement of the societal challenges that we face. Right, and to give an example to do with infrastructure. And climate change, it's clear that we do need massive infrastructure investment in our cities, whether it's energy, whether it is dealing with strategic risks such as stormwater runoff, etc. The investment will come, no doubt. So there's massive both public and private investment lined up, but that has two risks. One is that we end up concentrating wealth through massive infrastructure investment if done in the wrong way, so that we do not achieve a just transition to a different future. And the second one is just building the wrong infrastructure, right? Which is obviously related to the first one. Good example in Madrid. Madrid is about to, has already done and will do more of it, massive stormwater retention basins, massive concrete cathedrals dug into the ground, which have absolutely no societal benefit apart from occasionally being able to store an enormous amount of water when needed. Right? They are costly. They're environmentally costly. Think of all that concrete. They have a massive opportunity cost in terms of often even physically taking the place of what could be wetlands that have enormous absorption capacity, that are part of a massive urban system that is fundamentally distributed and has several spillover and positive impacts, such as health, such as mental health, such as biodiversity, such as other pollution absorption, etc., etc. Right. So this is just one example of how we're at risk of building the wrong stuff through the wrong methods, and where we need fundamentally a different logic, right? Which we would argue is all about civic assets and civic infrastructure that build community wealth and that have multiple impacts. But I think it's the multiple impacts that are particularly relevant for this discussion, because these multiple impacts are, by their nature, diffuse, right? And they need to be invested in a way that can deal with the fact that they're diffuse. And that, in turn, requires a new set of background institutional infrastructures, such as smart contracts and ways of accounting for multiple impacts through diffuse data points. And I think that's where we quickly end up with the discussion that we want to have tonight, which is so how do we envisage that institutional infrastructure?
Which is kind of interesting also, because originally blockchain discourse was kind of filled with this anti-institutional sentiments, right? But now you seem to be moving away from this.
Absolutely, and I think this is fundamental. We think of the world in non-antagonistic, non-oppositional terms. I think it's critical in the transitions that we face that sort of David and Goliath can walk together, right, as it were, because that's the game we're in. And governments need to invest. Governments want to invest. Governments can invest, and so can the private sector with good intent and good outcomes. But that needs to be matched with and be open to the impact and intent and the purpose, energy, and in some cases money of the many in ways that unlock participation, unlock trust, and unlock community wealth. Yeah.
So, and this brings me back to the question. This program is also all around the blockchain city, right? You mentioned Madrid. We'll get into that later. But what is the potential of blockchain for institutional infrastructure?
Right. So it is to be able to unlock a collaborative infrastructure for financing and for taking account of multiple impacts that can be open to the input of the many. Right. So I think in particular it does several things. One is that it can deal with the real-time interaction between multiple live data points. So think with regards to, say, nature-based solutions and green infrastructure, think satellites, Internet of Things, citizen sensing. So there's going to be multiple data points that are critical to financing, because ultimately we want to be able to finance these things on the basis of the impact that they create. They reduce risk. They enable people to live better lives. Think about an urban forest. Think about the impacts that it has on mental health, on physical health, on biodiversity. You need to be able to measure that, prove that, capture it in smart contracts on the basis of which you can channel new sources of finance, whether large or small. Right. So the massive number of data points is point number one. Secondly, you ideally want these data points to sit beyond centralized database ownership. Right. So you want for that system to be part of a civic infrastructure itself and not be wholly dependent on the city. Not because that would inherently be a bad thing, but probably because cities are not the best placed agents to manage that. Right? And thirdly, fundamentally, this is about coordinating across multiple actors. Right? And those are investors, those are various beneficiaries, which can include utilities, which can include the health service, which can include communities. Communities themselves are active agents. For example, in the case of an urban forest, doing all the caring for your green infrastructure that you need. And you need to be able to coordinate, align, and enable transactions between all these parties, again, through smart contracts. And lastly, we think that, well, two last points perhaps. Tokenization is, I think, integral to this, namely being able to make various real-world phenomena like, again, an urban forest open to a whole series of micro-investments in terms of their carbon sequestration potential, in terms of their ecosystem services, etc. And ultimately, possibly, we think that distributed ledger technology may open the route also towards self-sovereign nature, right? To really put nature in its own place and not just make it dependent on the various human interests that we have in nature flourishing. So I think ultimately. It's always going to be for us about targeted applications. Right? We don't reify it as the whole thing and nothing but the whole thing. Absolutely not. This is for us not about distributed autonomous organizations. We think it's about being able to coordinate ultimately and execute a massive number of smart contracts that enable the channeling of investment to the stuff we need in our cities.
Yeah. Klaas, you have a burning question.
Well, one observation is that this kind of this is predicated on the dimension again of trustlessness, in the sense that all these different parties can trust the algorithm to distribute things fairly and equally. So in that sense, it's in contrast with the previous examples. The other thing is that it is also predicated on a thing that's been discussed also in the first and the second iteration of this program. the base of all these transactions is financial. So it also financializes all these relations. So, and that is, from the perspective of certain actors, this is definitely interesting, but from several other actors, this may not be interesting and not desired at all. I'm thinking back to the first iteration, the disorderly city. So these are, well, actually, I think questions to discuss in the final discussion, but there's two observations here,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is what we continuously reflect on in Dark Matter. Right? We ultimately aim for systems and institutions that are very, very human, right? Ultimately, what this aims towards is a group of citizens being able to plant and enjoy and care for an urban orchard, let's say, have regular street parties around that, during which they can build real community around their sustainable living goals, right? And imagine and live a better city in a future-proof, live a better life in a future-proof city, right? That's what this is about. The tragedy is we don't have the institutional infrastructure to channel resources to make that stuff happen at a mass scale and place it beyond the kind of the beautiful exceptions, right? Yeah. That is the problem. And one of the problems that relates to is ultimately that large scale money rarely meets the super granular needs of cities and communities in that way. Yeah. We know that. I mean, even the average Dutch foundation has trouble getting 5,000 euros out of the door. Why? Because it's just as expensive getting 5,000 euro, or 50,000 or 100,000 euro out of the door. The result of which is lots of communities that need resources that could do beautiful things with those resources ultimately don't get them, right? Yeah. That's the problem we need to overcome. Yeah. And we think that smart contracts and tokenization and these new ways of tracking impact and transacting on that will be necessary. But it is for us, we don't reify digital technology. We see it as a tool in order to achieve real world outcomes. Yeah.
So can you, before we go to the end discussion with everyone, or maybe see this as a starting point to go to the end discussion, can you describe us your ideal future blockchain city scenario? And maybe take an example as Madrid, as you said earlier on.
Yeah, and I think I've described many of the elements already. Yeah, sure. So Madrid is looking to plant an urban forest in and around its cities, right? Unlocking a whole range of what are currently marginal or unused or suboptimally used sites, and turning that into much greener sites. It needs it. It has a massive issue with urban heat island effect. It has a massive issue with soil erosion. There are several reasons why Madrid needs it. It doesn't have the money to execute on its ambition, but also it doesn't have the model to achieve it. It sees trees, it sees green infrastructure still as a cost. It treats it as something expensive that is to be maintained without citizens. There's actually there's hardly any participation in how green space is maintained, and that makes it impossible to do it well. Which partially we've seen during the last winter storm, where lots of trees were lost, partially because the forest and the parks were degraded. So what we see as an ideal alternative model is a model in which the land, whether public or private, the funders, the multiple investors that are willing to invest in green infrastructure but currently aren't because the city isn't able to unlock that, the beneficiaries, whether the health service or utilities or indeed communities themselves, and the stewards of places in the city, essentially communities, individuals and groups, are bound together in a system that enables them to achieve these outcomes, bound by a series of smart contracts that enable the resources to channel to the front line. And that, we think, will ultimately unlock the orchard harvest parties that I described. Right? But you have to be able to bind in all these agents for this to work.
Which is also a question Klaas and I have been talking about, and would be a great reason to bring in the rest as well. So all the speakers to the table, because as I understand it, blockchain works basically as an island, right? So how does this these different initiatives, different projects, be it on a kind of institutional scale or a more local scale, how do we bring them together, right? So Klaas, maybe you can also add a bit on.
Yeah, well, you put it quite well, but so if you imagine a city in which both circles, the commonhoods and the institutional level and the energy grid, smart grid, energy calculation grid, if they're all together, do we then have something that actually works better than what we have now, or do problems pile up?
And
I mean, and then to be more specific, like the circles really works on trust in the network, but not the trust in people is something else. And this is the opposite, if you put that angle, is the opposite in your institutional framework. And the Commonhood project works on a university as a kind of the backbone party. It's a very different logic, very different kind of type of network than the network that you describe. I wonder if this is actually compatible in one actual city, or do we need separate cities to kind of to satisfy the needs of several blockchains? This is, of course, an ironic question.
Let's see if we can start with Guido.
Yes. Okay. Now, I think that there are advantages. For example, the tokens of circles could become the input of our crowd sales without any problems. Moreover, also for the energy point of view, you can exchange energy tokens with other kind of tokens in the local economy. I also like very much the metaphor, the naturalistic metaphor of Tara. The higher the water, and the more you can do your dishes or whatever. Maybe we can extend to other metaphors like the sun. The more it's sunny, the more you can use your automated dryer machine or whatever. From the technical point of view, I guess it's easier because there are many works on interoperability between blockchains. So we don't need to have a single infrastructure. We can simply pass tokens from one to the other. So it could scale nicely also at the infrastructure point of view.
Sarah?
Thanks. I'm glad Guido just brought up blockchain interoperability, which is an area of research with some solutions in production already. And I guess, but I also think that there are advantages to having aspects of infrastructure run separately. And a diversity of protocols can meet a diversity of needs. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I actually see having one protocol to rule them all as a really problematic strategy. And I guess on the second question of would this hypothetical city be better than our current city? I think for me, and in the context of my work on circles, it's never been a question of being sure that this will result in anything better, but feeling like it is a seed of an idea that is good enough to be worth trying. And we should get some actual data about what it makes better and what it might not.
Right. Tara, anything to add?
Actually, I do. I think one of the main issues that we were looking at in the Circulate project is this idea of value transparency and what happens in this case on a communal level when people who are participating in the system may have different values, right? So if you use the Energizer as a tool and you have one resident that says like, oh, I see it's really low, I'm not gonna turn on my washing machine. And somebody else is like, I see it's really low, you know what, I really need to do the wash. Like you have a value conflict in that moment, which is something that has to be negotiated in the future programming of the algorithm. So in that sense, you're dealing with this tension of like individual versus collective needs, goals, motivations. And I think when I hear about some of these projects that involve multiple actors, I really wonder like if there is going to be a clash of values, whether they are moral, ethical, financial, whatever, which would prevent a really smooth collaboration, regardless of the technology that's being implemented. Yeah. That's my concern.
Yeah. Joost? A reply on this?
Yeah, no, I think this is my my moment to agree with pretty much everything that's been said before. I mean, firstly, I think what we're putting on the table is an investment thesis, right? It's early stage research. We're working together with a series of cities funded by organizations interested in climate institutional innovation, like EIT Climate Kick. We don't know, but it's worth trying, right? As was said before, and it's. We think there's a need. We have a hunch that this might work. It's definitely worth trying. And in that, I think essentially it's like with renewable energy. There's multiple complementary systems. The need is big enough that multiple systems can exist alongside each other. Total integration is not the point at this stage. I think we're in a situation where ultimately we need to pursue several options at the same time, right? It's a portfolio approach. We cannot afford to put all our bets on one system and for that not to work. So multiple complementary and even contradictory positions is what we need to pursue, I think, as city makers wanting to accelerate our agency. And then in more specific terms, for example, in Vienna, the question about, okay, so how could we remunerate individuals and communities for some of their actions in the public realm, right? Around, for example, green space care and maintenance are very live, right? They do not want some of this to be done entirely on a voluntary basis, and they're thinking about these remuneration systems and tokens, etc. And so I can see several points of interconnection, which again are all to be explored. I think experimentation is what we need, and yes, there will be clashes. There will absolutely be clashes, and I think these clashes of values. It's never the case that you can completely bypass politics and fundamental conflicts of interest through technology, right? Exactly. So they'll come on our path, and that's logical, and we'll progress as we encounter those issues.
Klaas, kind of final conclusion / finalizing question for our guests.
Honorable task. Thank you. Yeah, I'm thinking back to a term that Stako used in the previous edition: sufficiency. And I would say clearly that all the projects that were discussed today are built on this idea of sufficiency and not doing more than what is needed to achieve a specific goal. But as we all know from all tech projects, there is this function creep, and there is this okay, we have the tool now. What else can we do with it? So that's an impulse to kind of to stay away from, to kind of not trust. I do think there's what you brought up again, the values kind of embedded in the particular application are not always aligned. So here is indeed political negotiation, and it's not just enough to say, well, our systems can interoperate, so it's fine. Whether you need to trust the person or whether you don't need to trust the person really makes a difference. Then that's not in the technology, that's outside the technology. So there's a whole good, let's say, healthy room for politics here. I'm also very much, like what you said, it's not about kind of doing away with antagonism or with agonistic ideas of politics. It's built in, so I think this is in a way promising. But I must say I lost a little bit of my skepticism. I think it's really I mean, all your stories are convincing to they do something specific and they do it well.
Yeah.
But, we have to see how this plays out together. Yeah. And
also, this plays out as the end of this series, at least, of the Blockchain City, the rights to the Blockchain City. Klaas or Tara, you're here also on behalf of the Circulate project. What's next for that project? Maybe I'm looking at Tara.
Yeah, what's next for me is that in a week and a half we're going to install the geyser. So I'm really looking forward to that. We, of course, had numerous delays, pandemic, blizzard, you name it. Right. And now we're really going to do it. So that's my next big step.
Amazing. Yeah, Klaas?
And also during the course of the project, several people were interviewed in different contexts that all kind of brought essential points to this research, and that led to a series of videos that will also be published online.
Yeah. Great.
There's also a paper. Actually, I don't know the title of the paper. A fantastic academic paper that really discusses this design dimensions that you have to take into consideration. And I would say that all these projects took into consideration in a rather particular ways. But sorry, I don't know the title by heart.
But you can find it on the website of Circulate Project. Let's see if we have that somewhere. If not, you can find it on the website of Pakhuizen Zwijger. I want to thank you, guest speakers here for joining us this evening. Thank you so much here as well. And you at home for watching this final episode, and have a wonderful evening.